All right, welcome everybody to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where I am happy that we are once again joined by the legendary, and I'll say that unapologetically legendary. You've earned it, Anton. Anton Chaitkin, who has really blown a lot of people's minds, has devoted his entire life, I'd say, to the truth and to pulling the truth out of the ugly shadows of the basement where certain forces would prefer reality be kept and into the light of day. And he's still doing it in a hard, heavy, big, important way with two books that have just been released: Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress, volumes 1 and 2. Volume 3 is currently in the work. I have both volumes 1 and 2. I think everybody should get those. If you don't have them already, go to the link under the description box, get those books. Anton is just making a lot of major discoveries that every single little thread he's pulling on, I find fascinating. And in today's world, where we are teetering on the abyss of some major crises, existential crises, the likes of which we haven't seen in centuries, it's so important to pull these historic lessons together right now. And the opportunities for something really beautiful are also equally there, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, despite the fact that things can get kind of dark sometimes. And hence, the optimistic spirit and philosophy that Anton has is, I think, just again so important. And thank you so much, Anton, for devoting your time. And I'm looking forward to learning as well as hearing the Q&A that's going to flow after your formal remarks are finished. The stage, until then, is all yours.
Thank you, Matt. There's a lot of pretty distinguished people here, authors and friends on this call. What I'm going to discuss is the work ongoing now, my writing and research for volume 3 of Who We Are. This will take the story going back to the 1890s and going forward to the current era. And I want to urge everybody to picture, as well as they can, a world which you've been led to believe was unnatural or only a fantasy, a world of peace and progress. And I want to try to have you reverse that thinking in your mind. I'll try to introduce some help for that, to show that what advances were being made, what progress of science and industry and living standards was going on in the first period that I'll discuss, was natural, was what people normally do, and that the disasters that followed, the wars and imperial savagery, were not at all natural. They were contrived by really within the United States, a very small clique of people allied to the empire abroad. Sometimes people think that man is naturally a savage, a beast. They would cite the reactions of an individual who is in bad circumstances. Sorry, I'm going to turn this off. And may seek personal revenge or something like that. And that may be true for an individual, but that's not how these wars have come about. When you see the contest going on, it becomes very obvious. So I'm going to go back to start with here to the 1890s. The last volume, volume 2 of my work, ended in the 1890s. But I'm going to go back there because there's a lot of new material to give you the right setting for what happened in the 20th century. First of all, when the bloody Civil War ended in the United States in 1865, there then followed a third of a century where the US had peace with the rest of the world. And there was um, there was great progress despite um, um, not always being under the leadership of the best people, but the idea and much of the um, protectionist and other measures from Lincoln during his administration continued for the rest of the 19th century. And there was a new generation of leadership that came in really in the 1890s. So the tradition of those who were building not only the United States but other countries within that period of great progress in the late 19th century, the tradition was that of the Union victory in the Civil War. Many of the leaders of our country, the United States, had been officers or soldiers in the Union struggle. For example, President McKinley, who became president 1897, had been a Union officer with distinction. And all the people in industry who made the great progress had been soldiers or officers. And they had the idea of lifting people's burdens with technology and with scientific breakthroughs. This was also true in other countries. They were not only reading the books of American economists, particularly Henry Carey in this period, in Russia and in India and in other places, but they were seeing the example of the United States under the sovereignty and protectionist ideas, progressive nationalism. They saw the unparalleled progress that the U.S. was making, and so in the countries that I'm going to discuss here, to start with, which is Russia, India, and Mexico, they all had some personal. The leaders that I'll discuss had some personal reference to this American progress. Now, I am personally under certain kind of difficult circumstances, which I won't discuss, but one benefit that I have from the current technology is that I don't have to go out, which I can't do, to libraries and archives. I can do things by remote control under the internet, and I can also get the help of wonderful people in other countries and other in libraries and so forth. I'm reading some things that are real treasures that are available to anybody. I'll give you an example. Here's a book of a great leader of India. His name is Jamsetji Tata, the founder of the Tata family in India, the founder of their great fortune and great enterprises. I'll get to what he did, but in this book, there are things. This book is the biography of the man authorized by that family. Other books don't understand what the people in the family understand about the relations between nationalists in different countries and what that means. Nationalism is never chauvinism. If you hate another country and you're constantly bickering with them, you don't understand nationalism. And Tata wasn't like that. He was a pearl of a golden soul. But you get this from books and from archives. I had something from the archives of the steel mill in Mexico with the help of wonderful Mexican people I talked to by remote control, historians and others. And I got the records of the cooperation between Mexico and the United States. And then you have in Russia, I found a pamphlet put out by the people associated with the U.S. Navy in the 1870s about the visit of a Navy group led by the Assistant Secretary of the Navy went to Russia to cement the friendship between United States and Russia. And in that pamphlet, they have a speech from the banquet table in Moscow about how they're learning from Henry Carey, and he's the great economist of the United States, and our two countries have the tremendous shared interests and the shared emancipation of our slaves and so forth. So here's another book. I'm showing you these things because what I'm doing, if it's not new, then it's not worth anything. And so hopefully before I die, I'm still going to be able to do a lot of new things. Here's a book I got from a wonderful company in a little town called Alliance, Ohio. Can you see this? It's from the Morgan Engineering Company. And I found out from the archives of the steel mill in Mexico that this company sent great cranes, electric cranes in the 19th century down there. And this company is still in business. They put out a book, a gorgeous book about 100 and how long it is, 150 years of this company. A humorous aspect of it is that they made the retractable roof for the Toronto baseball stadium. And so I knew that the first game of the World Series was going to go ahead without rain by having read this book about what happened 150 years ago. All right, so let's look at first at what did the United States look forward to in the late 1890s. We had a third of a century of peace with the world. And we saw in Russia and Germany and China and Japan the possibilities for a complete revolution in human affairs, especially with the tie between the United States and Russia, which was our greatest ally in the world, had been so since the American Revolution, and again proved that with what the U.S. did for the Russians and what the Russians did for the U.S. The leader of Russian progress, Count Sergei Witte, the finance minister, was promoting the railroad to the Pacific Ocean, and with that railroad, it was the best route for it was to go through China, was to be the Manchurian Railway of the Russian Railway through China to the Pacific Ocean. This was a joint project with the United States. I'll get back to that in a second, but this was, we saw that only Russia would be available to help China develop. China had a poor government under the empires before they had a republic, and the British had their mitts on it. So the idea of the nationalists in Russia and in China was that those two countries would develop together, and it depended on the Russians getting out to the Pacific with the railroad. The Japanese were in that same period, were having a navy built for them in British shipyards, in English shipyards. The British were building these warships that were later used to attack Russia. But the Americans saw the Russians going to the Pacific as something that was in our great world interest. We had a Pacific Rim outlook. For the American hemisphere, we would have the nations of South America developed, starting with railroads that were transcontinental within South America and intercontinental between North and South America, which were connected as they are not now connected because of the Panama Canal. They were connected at the isthmus. And so there was a plan that began development in 1889 and 1890 with a railroad commission that was planning with U.S. Army engineers and with the engineers and leaders of, I would have to say, every single country of South America. And in the reports of this commission, you see all of these countries eagerly promoting. Peru was promoting transcontinental railroads. This was the American idea. And this was the idea of James Blaine, the Secretary of State in 1890. And then after he died, his protege McKinley as president. This was the vision of the United States, that there would be this development of the Americas together. This would be on the Pacific Rim as well as in the Atlantic, but together with Russia, together with China, hopefully with Japan, and then as you'll see with India, this was a new world that superseded this world of chaos and increasing poverty wherever the British Empire and the other empires went. The people in India saw that their country was going backwards into jungle. The jungle was spreading in India under the British. They weren't conserving forests, they were spreading jungle. So this was the world that we were looking for. Now, just a little bit about the technology. The railroads in the United States, we had the Transcontinental Railroad built completed in 1869, the first one commissioned by Lincoln. And the driving force for the perfection of railroads was not that Transcontinental itself. It was the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, because it was a complex of developers in Philadelphia. Westinghouse, George Westinghouse, the inventor who was in Pittsburgh, made his fortune perfecting the railroads of the United States. He made an air brake, and this allowed the trains to go fast and stop automatically. He developed many signals and automatic controls together with the steel rails. All of this was tested out by the Pennsylvania Railroad. In 1897, when McKinley became president, Westinghouse set up an air brake factory in St. Petersburg. Also in 1897, the leader of the furnace superintendents under Carnegie went to Russia and built the great steel mill there to produce rails in Russia, as well as having the U.S. sending rails for the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So this is our railroads were being made into super conveyors of fast freight. That's the basis for any economy. And that was the basis for getting the American powerhouse of an economy going. Then you had the development of steel, with especially the advance in the 1890s was opening up the Mesabi Iron Range, cheap, very high quality iron ore scooped up by big shovels, and they put on trains and brought by ships to the mills, and where they would use these huge cranes and various loading and unloading devices. The United States was already becoming like a single agro-industrial powerhouse with electricity. already in the 19th century. This was the center of modernization in the world. Electricity, you went from Edison, who set up the first power plants, and then Westinghouse, who took it from there, and the technology went from the direct current to alternating current. Yes, there was a stupid argument by Edison against this advance after he'd lost control of his company to Morgan. But the way to look at this is simply that the industry and the technology went into an advance to use alternating current that can be long distance. George Westinghouse set up the great project at Niagara Falls, which was for the United States and for Canada. The Canadians did their own work, but it was initiated by Westinghouse. This was a project to show the world that this gigantic force of all the water from the Great Lakes pouring over one spot could be harnessed and sent long distance transmission. So this was something that the world saw. This was the advance of electricity. Then you had petroleum, and the great advance in petroleum, and this is something not very well known, but it's really crucial. Petroleum started within the United States. The development began in Pennsylvania. This is way before Texas or Oklahoma. Pennsylvania Railroad organized the transport of the oil made by independent men, drillers. And then Rockefeller moved in to monopolize it. So then a guy named Edward Doheny, an Irish American whose family had been the leaders of the uprising of 1848, the absolute leaders. His family was it. In Tipperary, they had to flee. So he is an Irish American born in Wisconsin. He went out to Los Angeles after failing at prospecting, and he built up the oil industry in Los Angeles. He saw the La Brea tar pit. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's exuding this oil, this tar, and he reasoned that there would be a big petroleum there. So he, with pluck and a lot of intelligence, built up the oil industry of Los Angeles. And the big advance that he did is he convinced the railroads out there to use this petroleum as a fuel without refinement. This is getting around Rockefeller and his hold on the oil industry back in Pennsylvania. So it's a flank. He then went to Mexico. And so now you're ready to get these three projects. This is the great projects of the United States of America at that time. The greatest projects really were beyond the United States itself. The first was in Russia, the steel mill and the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The rails, the electrical equipment produced by Americans in America and in Russia for the Russians. This is not looting any other country. This is to promote Russia's growth as a great power, as our ally. So then the second thing is in 1900, the Mexicans built with American equipment the Monterrey steel mill, 1900. And they were aided by a nationalist down there who was the governor of in a northern Mexican state. I'm not going to go through that now, but these people looked to the industrialization of Mexico as part of the scheme of all of the countries led by the United States to develop the Western Hemisphere. Doheny, the guy who built up the oil in Los Angeles, this Irish American, went into Mexico and built up the oil industry of Mexico. Rockefeller was there with Standard Oil, but he didn't build up the country. He dabbled in trying to get oil out of there and make money. The British set up an oil company in response to Doheny, the Eagle Oil Company. They wanted to send the oil out to the British Navy to fuel it now instead of coal. Doheny got rich in Mexico more than he had been in Los Angeles by convincing the railroads to use petroleum to fuel them. And this is an essential part of the idea of developing the two hemispheres, the two North and South continents together. The last project occurred after the death of President McKinley as part of the coup d'etat that occurred at the beginning of the 20th century that I'll mention. I'm not going to go through this in depth, but this fellow with the turban came from India, Jamsetji Tata. He went to the United States to get help building a steel mill in India, and he was going to pay for it. He's a wealthy Parsi who already had clothing mills, and he was looking for the independence of India from the British. And so he came to Cleveland, met with the political manager for McKinley, the head of the Republican Party, not Teddy Roosevelt, who was president at that time. And they had a meeting of leading industrialists to meet with this guy from India to say, okay, how are we going to stick it to the Brits? Let's help him every way we can. And that's in this book, not in other books, that meeting. Because it's the family. It's the family tradition within the Tata family. You can look up the Tata family. So they went back, they built a gigantic and totally modern steel complex in the middle of a jungle and made it into a great city with good conditions for the workers. Because the Americans involved and Tata himself wanted to have good wages. That's the American system. Let's see. Tata also, when he was in the United States, he went with George Westinghouse up to Niagara Falls and was shown the whole complex. He went back to India, and his family built great hydroelectric projects. So these are the great advances that were done. And these were pearls and prizes of the nationalist faction within these countries. In India, it's astonishing because the British didn't like this and they were governing the country. But the Tatas are very, very smart people. They knew how to get around them. All right. You have a three-step coup d'etat that occurred 1898. The Teddy Roosevelt faction induced a war, a colonial-type war against Spain to grab Cuba and the Philippines against the will of the president. The second part of it was the president was induced to take Teddy Roosevelt, his enemy, as his running mate for vice president in 1900, and then in 1901, the president was shot to death while discussing at an exposition the whole program for peace in the American hemisphere. So this brought in Teddy Roosevelt, and it brought in a philosophy of war. The idea was everywhere in the world, this is the Teddy Roosevelt philosophy and the philosophy of the British Empire, not the American idea. Try to understand the switch that is occurring here. Teddy Roosevelt, read his own books and read the books of the Adams family, the betrayers of John Quincy Adams, his grandsons, Brooks Adams and Henry Adams. Their point of view and Teddy Roosevelt's point of view is that war is something to be desired. It strengthens the character. It also throws off those rogue countries that might try to settle down and increase their power in the world, like Russia, like India, like Egypt, God knows what. All of these countries. Teddy Roosevelt endorsed the Balfour idea of setting up a Jewish state in Palestine. I think this was in 1917. All of these ideas were for somehow quashing the American conception of peace and progress in the world, which was natural and under which all of our advances took place. I am not portraying in this book or the earlier books the leadership that made advances as being saints. And I'm going to show in this volume, for example, that Carnegie, with his steel mill, underwent a change in his own philosophy under pressure from the financiers. And the wages were cut, the hours were brought again to 12 when they had been 8, and so forth. And then he lost control of his company to Morgan. Westinghouse lost control of his company to Morgan, like Edison lost control of his company to Morgan. The financiers that, if you look up in some shallow history, they'll be credited with building these industries rather than being the destroyers of them. And you see the end result of deindustrialization that was done by Morgan and Chase and Rockefeller and the Eastern establishment in the United States and the Canadian establishment, the British establishment, Margaret Thatcher. These are the deindustrializers. But these institutions, these financial institutions, were doing that deindustrialization back then in the 19th century, deindustrializing anywhere they went, trying to stop the progress of industry. Some of the companies that will be appearing in the early parts of this volume 3, some of them are in this wonderful complex of Pittsburgh and Eastern Ohio, were involved later on in building up these same countries. The Mexican steel mill was modernized in the 1960s in the Kennedy era with an American company's help. This is before NAFTA. This is before the free trade mania after when we were plunged into our wars and savagery. The Americans built in the 1930s. They helped the Soviets build a great steel plant at Magnitogorsk. This saved many American lives. The Mexican steel mill in Monterrey saved many American lives in World War II, producing equipment for the battle. These were the centers of higher wages for these countries and allowed for the production of these capital goods within the United States under higher wage conditions. So this is something where the people involved knew that this was for mutual benefit. There's a funny anecdote about Westinghouse. When Westinghouse built the air brake company factory in St. Petersburg, this was in the 1890s. Later on, the communists took over Russia, and there were Soviets of workers, and there was a demand that the workers should should manage the factory. And this was negotiated, and they sort of went around it. And then one of the superintendent, the Westinghouse superintendent of the factory, was put on the Soviet council to decide some of the practices of industry. It was very funny, and they just kept going under the Soviet Union. It was the United States and Russia as a country that was crucial, not the particular leadership. You have the same idea with FDR. The greatest advance in a foreign country under FDR was in Brazil, where there was an entire program for the development of the steel mill that I think it's called Volta Redonda there, which is a U.S. government and government of Brazil project. That's the second great steel mill of Latin America. The first one was this also Mexican and U.S. project in Monterrey. All of these things are directly counter to imperialism. What imperialists from the USA or from Britain or France will do when they go into one of these underdeveloped countries is they will set up a mine, or it could be a factory, low-wage labor, and then the profits of these companies will go out of the country. The people will learn nothing, and they will be degraded by the presence of these foreigners. These installations of heavy industry, of steel, electricity, dams, and railroads of the right type, and petroleum. What Doheny did in Mexico, which was an industrial complex for Mexican oil. All of these things were for the mutual benefit of the United States and the other countries. At the same time, there were other Americans in the Boston and New York and London circuit who were going into all these countries hoping to loot them. And eventually the banana plantation is the model. The degradation of the culture. At the same time, as you will be able to see, as our culture in the United States was degraded, the workforce in all these other countries was degraded by this kind of imperial leadership. So we had a brief. I'll just summarize this. There was a brief repeat. What President Harding in 1921 called normalcy. It was an attempt to revert to this condition of peace and international progress. Doheny and other Harding supporters went to Russia to try to get a deal with Lenin. That president died in office. That deal was scotched. There was a scandal called Teapot Dome, a completely fake scandal, and I'll go into that in the book later on, to blacken the name of Doheny and to try to make you forget about any of these kind of enterprises and what the USA had done inside its own borders as well as in other countries. And then you had the revival of this kind of outlook with Franklin Roosevelt. And as people have commented who I've shared some of the findings with, what FDR did with his world vision is in almost every way a repeat of what was going on in the 1890s by the United States. If you start talk about technicalities of tariffs or something like that, it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. The steel mill project in Brazil was developed late in FDR's administration as a part of the programming for the World Bank and IMF, which together with the United Nations were supposed to be world developers. So this is the image in the minds of people who studied what the United States was doing in these other earlier times. The leadership of Republicans who joined, the McKinley Republicans, Lincoln Republicans who joined with FDR in the New Deal, and the leadership around John Kennedy when he learned enough to go back to this and to fight for it, this kind of image for world progress. All of the advances, and I think including the nuclear energy for peaceful uses, which you don't hear about. You only hear about the bomb caused you to get nuclear power plants later. But there was an image of nuclear power for peaceful purposes before you ever had a bomb. There's a great article in the New York Times in 1940. So this is the natural and normal American identity. And the wars and the mayhem and the United States being used as the supplier and in some ways strategist for the evil of the world today. Israel's mass murder and genocide in Gaza and elsewhere. This is induced, it's top down, it's not approved by the people of any country, not really. And so the natural, normal idea of our country is shown, and other countries who have the shared idea, the shared progressive nationalism in each country is the history of the world. The oligarchs are the unnatural, and of course they show you their unnatural character by their fetishes in sex and all this other stuff. They're completely unnatural, bestial. So that's a little bit of a report of this volume 3 that I'm working on. I'm doing it as fast as I can and under the circumstances that I face. And so I'm hoping to get, cooperation and support from people and to continue to have fun with this as these archive things become available, as they are. Things just spring up out of the archives to help in this process.
Yeah. No, I think that again, it's so valuable, and again, the work that you've done is providing weapons for generations to come to really deal with this unnatural thing. And I like the fact that you point out how unnatural the oligarchy is, because human beings, we've been so targeted and psyoped over so many generations into believing that we are the unnatural ones, that human beings are overpopulated, that we are, when we try to do industry, we're unnatural because we go outside of our limits to growth, and we produce more than what nature would naturally do if left to our own devices. So we're unnatural, we're abusive, we're destructive, and industry was really hammered hard, and young people especially who've gone through the education system over the past 40 years have really been subjected to a lot of this, where even for me, it took me years to sort of shake this stuff off, this brainwashing. Whenever I would see a smokestack or something in the distance, I would get disgusted to my inner core. And it took me a while to start seeing that I was duped, and that there's actually something else going on, and that the greatest bursts of liberty and of progress that we have had a lot to do with the fact that industrialists were also moral patriots as human beings first, and they didn't dichotomize this idea that if you want to be a capitalist, you have to be selfish, and if you want to be someone who thinks about the greater good, you have to be a communist. And they didn't make those mistakes. They were just human beings trying to be creative and do the good for the future, and they used their influence in the private sector to make it happen. And there wasn't this dichotomy between politics and economics. So again, all of your work, it's a breath of fresh air just seeing how you weave this together, and I really appreciate that so much. I guess one question I have before I jump in, Thomas has a question. I know that Vic has a question. I'm sure other people do too. Sort of maybe superficial, but it bothers me. And I'm curious. Carnegie seemed early on to be a really positive influence. I guess you could say Henry Ford had a bit of a very positive influence too early on in the world. But something happened to these guys, and especially Carnegie, that it transformed him. And you said he was worked on by forces in and around him into becoming something, pretty bad ultimately. And his Carnegie Institution or Carnegie Foundation has done so much damage. But what would you say would account for how somebody like that would turn into a pro eugenics asset of the empire?
He was never totally pro eugenics. His mind was a whirligig by the end of his life. He was still promoting this intercontinental railway and world peace. But you have to look, I think you have to look at this the same way we look at somebody who's an activist today. Think about any organization. Think about the Black Panthers or the LaRouche organization or any group that is actually challenging the establishment. The first thing that the FBI or other private agencies, the Anti-Defamation League, the British intelligence, what have you, the first thing they do is they get into the legal department and the security department. I think the LaRouche's security detail was very good in this regard, but you see this kind of thing where the people penetrate because they're surrounded. The enemy is going to look at leaders and work on them, like the ghost seer. That's the model, right? In the Schiller short story. They're working on the mind. They're getting all around him. They're working on the economics around him. Carnegie was under the price of steel went down. So how is he going to why did it go down? Well, you had successful companies coming up. This is a brilliant industry, and there was competition, but mainly there was great progress in production. So the price went down. Wages were relatively high. How is he going to maintain the same ratio of profit to the total revenue? You can't, because it's going to go down. He's still making lots of money, but he's completely surrounded in terms of the financial world and the social world and what was going on with any of his friends' families and so forth by this financier oligarchy in New York, in Boston, out in Chicago. Rockefeller was developing this. So you're in the 1890s. There's a process of takeover of all the institutions of thinking and of industry by enemies of that kind of progress. Don't think of the industry as something in itself. Think of the advance of the industry and bold new moves to expand the scale and the scope of these things. This takes, for people to maintain that kind of leap, I would say, two things: inner fortitude and also a complex of people, an organization. You know, the Pennsylvania Railroad was surrounded by good leadership in many different ways. In science, Carey was there and his circle. And you had good presidents. The three great presidents of this era, Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, each one of those was shot to death. So he's being worked on. He eventually, in 1889, the same year that Edison had to turn over his company to Morgan, in 1889, Carnegie turned over his company to be managed by the guy supplying him with cheap coke. That's the pre-burnt coal to make steel with. This is Henry Clay Frick, who's a fascist, basically. And so he is a real anti-labor enforcer for the Mellon family in Pittsburgh. So they're completely surrounded, and I'm gonna have chapter 2 in this story is going to be that surrounding. This is prior to the coup d'état of that I described. Is that the whole proliferation of power over our country by this dark age faction of financiers. This is what's happening at that time. Uh, Carnegie stood up to this for quite a long time. You have this in every culture. You have this, you think about Israel, and you think about Yitzhak Rabin, who stood up against this and then was murdered. All right, you have the natural idea of people wanting a great advance who are visionaries are overwhelmed by people who are trying to stop, by forces, by groups, gangs, organized by this financier elite. But he didn't. So Carnegie did not himself. He wasn't the greatest philosopher. He came in the second rank of this leadership. And he didn't build his steel mill until 1875. This is 10 years after the industry had been started up. So he did the best that he could, I would say. And I would never demean him in his memory. But he became somebody who tolerated anti-labor practices and union busting. And he went off to Scotland to let Frick do the shooting in the Homestead strike, because he couldn't stomach it.
Okay, that was a very comprehensive answer, and I should expect nothing less. So thank you for that nuanced approach. So there's a number of people in line right now to ask you a question. I currently at this very moment I count about 8. How much time do you have?
Go ahead, I'm fine.
All right, Thomas, you're up. Oh, and everybody's on mute by default, so you got to take yourself off of mute, and then you can ask your question.
Is this Tomas Mifek?
That is
Yes,
him.
that's me. Yes.
Oh, great.
Straightforward question. If in any of your research, have you either come across or have you looked for any this American influence on in the Austro-Hungarian Empire? I'm just looking for links back to this country. And yeah.
Go ahead.
To follow up too on what Matthew was just saying too, about how in the West, especially like having grown up in Canada, and we've all been brainwashed about industry. That's one of the things that I noticed when I arrived here in the Czech Republic, is how much people lamented the loss of industry, and we're aware that you actually have to produce something and not just be a stockbroker or something like that. And you can see it here in this country too, or on both sides of the border. If you're ever going to be here again and get out of the big city, you can always take a tour of industrial architecture from the 18th or from the 19th and early 20th century, and most of the buildings are derelict and empty, following in the 90s. Right?
Well, let me say something about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included, what became Czech and Slovakia and all these things were part of it, in Hungary. It's two different things, isn't it? It's both the Habsburgs and all of this gang of freaks, not just the monarchy, they weren't even the worst of it, right? Obviously, there's a tradition there from earlier times of this Dark Ages, this super craziness of promoting ugliness and so forth. And we've learned about all these things. And we've learned about the evil that came out of this, what their influence was in Spain, the Inquisition, blah, 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 blah. But also, what's Vienna? Vienna's not just evil. It's a great city. And also in the complex of this city with other aspects of Austria, and Hungary and their cities and Prague and so forth. Look at these cities, and with Vienna as the principal one, really, in many ways, as great centers of progress and of thinking and of learning and of design and of great visions for producing things for man's benefit. Also, a great city in modern times or in any time is liable to be connected internationally to visionaries for progress and channels for that in the rest of the world. This goes back to ancient times everywhere. There's no local history. Everything is international. But I know that there were expositions, there were all kinds of contracts and designs for industry in Vienna in the period that I'm talking about, in the 1890s and beyond, and earlier, that Vienna was one of the great centers for progress. At the same time as you had this imposition of this craziness, both sides of the craziness, right? You had the craziness of oppression of these oppressed minorities, and then you have the stooges who would be people pretending to be liberating the oppressed minorities, and they're crazy anarchists or murderers or whatever, and it's both of them coming out of this gang in the aristocracy. But what needs to be investigated, what I'm getting at is that every nation is lacking the kind of work that I'm trying to do in terms of the history of industrial and scientific progress as a philosophy of governance and of something that's being promoted by people who have a vision of what the nation's supposed to be. That history has got to be discovered now. We've got to go back. Every country has this, and every country looks away from that in their history for one reason or another. I know that people in Prague celebrate the industry they had. Many of the people, good people and knowledgeable people, celebrate it, but they're not looking at this local, national, and also international idea of progress. Who were the great nationalists in this sense that I'm talking about of progress, of industrial and scientific progress? Who were they in the 19th century? Who were they in earlier times? How connected to the Germans, for example? Germany had a great influence, both from Austria and from Berlin in Czech, right? In Prague. And this is not all evil. It's not all Hitler, right? This is Humboldt. Right? So, but what is the actual origin? If this is seriously investigated from the same standpoint that I'm investigating American history, this industrial progress as a deliberate promotion of man's high destiny, look for that, the real background of that in Prague and also in Vienna and also in Budapest. Look for these things. Don't get sidetracked by the wars and the uprisings and the murders and the assassinations and the domination and so forth. The progressive nationalism, Ireland has the same problem. People are constantly sidelined into simply seeing Britain for the mass murderers. But then what is the idea of advancement and even holiness coming out of Ireland? What is that? How it's only successful insofar as it has the very highest vision of what has to become to the people of the country, with industry, with science, with learning. Look for that. Look for that vision in some individuals.
Yeah.
And you'll find treasures of history that nobody knows about now.
Yeah, I would just say that really is kind of the master key. If anybody wants to do like useful potent historical research. And I know a lot of people get a little demoralized by the idea, thinking, oh, but so many books have been written about the past. There's nothing new I can do. But it's not true. This philosophy, this paradigm that Anton just very, very efficiently expressed is so rare. And when you adopt it, when you adopt this hypothesis that human beings are a creature that is made good, reasonable, and grow qualitatively and quantitatively when we're at our happiest and most creative, when you adopt that and recognize that evil does exist in a certain form that is knowable and intelligible and has been there like a parasite trying to put a wet blanket on the fire for all of known history and probably way before, when you adopt that, then you just look around for any time that something really good has happened that increased freedom, productivity, and you will find that these were not done without a fight, and in no case. And you'll find increasingly when you read the writings of the people who were the big players in making these positive leaps occur, you'll find their writings, and you'll get a sense of a certain battle, and a story, a drama will begin to emerge. And Anton has done it again and again and again. Go on, Anton.
By the way, just one other thing, which is obvious, which I didn't mention.
Yeah.
What is Vienna? Isn't it the most beautiful music ever written?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. So therefore, that doesn't exist by itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. You can't be in a slave labor concentration camp and find all of these beautiful Mozarts and great sublime souls producing high art.
Yeah.
The economy is part of that. Well, Thomas just put out the figure of Emil Skoda, who's a major industrialist. Yeah, Thomas, that's
the Skoda works.
Yeah, we know, everyone knows who the major industrialist is, but not who the policymaker was.
Well, there you go. That's your homework assignment.
What is Skoda's relationship to this American story?
Yeah.
What's his relationship to the builders in other countries and the scientists, to the great thought leaders? And sometimes you'll see some relationship that appears to be minor or trivial or obscure, but then you find out that that's the whole story, pretty much the whole story. So look for this broader idea of development.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, Vic. Vic's been waiting for a bit. Vic, are you still there? I think I could find his question. Oh, there you are. Hey, Vic. Go.
All right. First off, it's truly an honor, sir, to even have you hear my voice, just to be with you. As Matt much more eloquently said, your works are changing lots of minds now and in the future. So you're replanting some of the true American model and really the true brotherhood model. So anyway, it's truly an honor. But my question was, I had read Evan Thomas's book, The War Lovers, and it's right about the time that you're talking about, the late 1800s, and it's FDR and Lodge and all those folks, and it's truly frightening when you hear them talk about, war is good because Darwinism was their fashion because it gave them moral justification for being on top. And if you truly believe survival of the fittest is really, the law or law of the jungle, if you want, anything is possible because you're not dealing with other humans, you're dealing with subhumans or something. But I was just wondering, if you could go a little bit more into your thoughts on you'd done a little line on that these folks were, they were warmongers, but I think it was, more of maybe a guilt feeling or maybe they're all psychopaths without guilt. But it was just they were using the science of Darwinism to justify war because clearly if you won, you were the top dog. What's your thoughts on that general theme, if you would?
Well, Darwin and Huxley were promoted in England in the late 19th century for this purpose. But this is there's many different currents in here. Um, the most obvious relationship of Theodore Roosevelt. You said FDR. That you didn't
Oh,
mean
I'm
that.
sorry. Yeah, that made
TR.
yeah.
The most obvious relationship of Teddy Roosevelt and Brooks Adams and Henry Adams and Alfred Thayer Mahan, the American naval strategist in the British faction. The most obvious relationship of them to fascism is, I would say, I put it in two ways. First of all, their idea about human beings is Hitlerian. They believe in the rule over the world of white imperialists, white conquerors. Exactly Hitler's idea, and which he got from this Anglo-American model. Really, Britain was the progenitor of it, but Teddy Roosevelt and his friends enunciated this ideal. They called it the English-speaking white people to need to rule the world. So that's one part of it. The other part of it that's really extraordinary in the history is that they put forward a strategy of using Japan and using a great war in Europe to crush both Russia and China, and of course to crush Germany, but specifically to make war against Russia and China and to promote racial conquest as the motif. This is literally the axis of World War II, before you even had World War I. They were all of this camp within the United States and within England were writing about the danger of Russia getting to the Pacific, about the danger of China developing industry and population and powerful modern conditions. Both Russia development and Chinese development were described by this faction as dangerous to the world order. And this is the British Empire conception. To understand, and of course, one of the center for this in the United States was Boston, as well as the old Confederacy. That's in Teddy Roosevelt's family. But Boston is where the Anglo-Saxon, you have an idea, the Anglo-Saxon rule over the world, which is directly contrary to the idea of the United States, right? The United States, as a nation, comes out of our Declaration of Independence from England and from the empire, and contains the idea that all men are created equal and they all have rights from God. That's the right of sovereignty. So the first condition of understanding this is to get it through our heads that this idea of conquest and also permanent war is a direct attack on American philosophy. This is somewhat complicated by what happened with the American Indians. You have to a bridge to understanding this is the eventual victory of the Union side in the Civil War. This is where you see the reluctant Americans eventually fighting to free the slaves. They did so reluctantly because they didn't want war within the country. So this is the American idea, and it's not racist. The racism within the United States is endemic to white people coming out of Europe. That's true. What people say about this, that's true. What the leftists say about this is certainly true. There is this anti-foreigner, white racism, et cetera, et cetera. So you have the best leadership putting forward laws, measures, economic actions in the private sector and in the government to cause the betterment of the culture of the population by making them skilled and educated people, by creating conditions that allow them to have a peaceful, progressive family life. And to do well, that allows the minorities to do well. The black people that got decent jobs, even if there was discrimination in the steel mills. So the leadership promotes a change in the thinking of the population. With the American Indians, we've never solved this. We never have done justice to them. And this is a paradox because it was necessary for the United States to get out to the Pacific. It wasn't necessary to steal all their land because there's plenty of land for everybody. I've been through this in other discussions. But the primary thing to understand, to contrast this fascist way of thinking, which is so prevalent in America now. Why would you go to war against Venezuela? What was the idea that Trump has, or that people around him have, in making a war now in the Caribbean? Whose idea is that? It's not an American idea. This is again and again and again, you see the same repeating thing coming from this faction. They tried to spread a Southern empire. Who did that? Lincoln denounced the war against Mexico. Teddy Roosevelt's uncle was arrested in Cuba trying to spread the slave revolution down there to take over. This is a constant. Allen Dulles in the same tradition. Take over, overthrow these governments, make war in the South. What were the Americans trying to do? They were trying to have a beneficial for both people development of heavy industry and science. You have to see this opposition of these two sides, or else you can't understand a damn thing about it.
Thank you.
All right. Bruce. Bruce, you still there?
Yes, hello. Anton, you alluded to Trump and Venezuela. Talk for a few minutes, if you would. What your impression of Donald Trump? What's he stand on? What's he allowing? What's he causing? What's your impression of him?
I don't particularly like Trump. I voted for him once, and but the clearest thing that I have to say to people, I'm not directly answering your question, but people who are among my friends, who, for example, went out to some of these anti-Trump rallies recently, there's no thought in their minds about what they want to do with the world, what they want to do with the United States or any other country. There's no idea at all about what should be done, what should happen, or whatever did happen that was any good. It's simply a reaction. And so right now, we have a very, very limited idea of what is governing the country. That was all the Republicans say that about Biden. We don't know exactly who is running the government, blah, 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 blah. It's still true. We know some things. Clearly, what Trump did in running for president was a good thing in itself to challenge the free trade and to challenge the idea that Russia's our enemy. If you could establish these two flanks somehow, then you would gain a great advance. In my view, and this is a very limited, because I'm not an expert about what's happening in the government now, but I know that from study of previous history, what's needed, in my view, is for somebody in public life, more than one person if possible, to speak about the system under which the United States labors, the system of power in the world. Don't just talk about the Kennedy assassination, although that's important. But what is the system of power extending from the so-called West around the world? What is the financial power? What is the intelligence power? The whole thing. And you don't have to get into the different complexities. I'm talking about what is the system? What's the operation of this for power? What are we up against? And what is the history of this just in terms of the change of the identity of the United States? If Trump would simply say, or anybody in his, Gabi, what's her name? Tulsi Gabbard or the late lamented RFK Jr., his mind is half blown. If they would simply say, okay, there was a change, there was a coup d'etat. He even used that expression, RFK Jr., at one point. What does this consist of? What is the change that took place? It's the earlier identity. It wasn't consistent, but it's all that we are if we're an independent country, if we have a real identity in the world, that positive identity. It was a change from that to a berserker. One of the things about what's happening in Venezuela or in Israel is that it's obvious to any professional that the so-called Western side, which I'm talking about the Anglo-Americans, NATO, Israel, blah, 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 is always in favor of the most extreme factions to be making war against them. Right? They're promoting the extremists wherever they go. This has been going on for in our time for decades. Israel promoted this, all the extremists. They tried to strike down all the moderates and so forth. This is a constant practice. If we want to have friends in Venezuela, would you make war on them? Is that a smart way to go? Does anybody think that it's a smart way to go? No, nobody thinks that. Trump does not think that he's going to get a good government in Venezuela by overthrowing the government there. That may not stop him from doing it. Maybe he's not even doing it. Maybe somebody else is doing it. But the fact of the matter is that when we got friends in other countries, we helped build up their power as independent of us. And that made them our friends. If that seems idealistic or fantasy or blah, 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 I'm sorry, that's the actual history. There isn't any other history. We never got any friends without promoting their independence and sovereignty and wealth and power, independent of us. That's how we got friends. The enemy conception is to create enemies all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I extend hello to you from Gerald Pechenik. I just interviewed him for an episode on my podcast.
Wow.
We ended that at just 15 minutes before this started. We for an hour and 15 minutes we debated to Trump or not to Trump. I'm phrasing it, And your insights are, again, just priceless and invaluable. Thank you, Anton.
Cool. Marilyn Langlois, are you still there?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anton. Super interesting, very, very informative. I've learned a lot from your presentation. I really appreciate it. First, I want to just allude to what you were saying about Vienna. Thank you for mentioning that. I lived in Vienna in the 70s and 80s, and my very first landlady drove a Skoda automobile. But also, in addition to the industrial developments and the sublime music, we must remember also that Joseph II in the early 19th century made a lot of social advancements in the betterment and uplift of the poor people. So a lot positive was going on there in addition to the crazy stuff. But my question actually refers to a topic you mentioned just a few minutes ago, and that is how, if at all, did the U.S. nationalists, as you described them, that is the anti-imperialists of the late 19th century, envision cohabiting the North American continent on a mutually beneficial and respectful basis with the indigenous people of the region, the American Indians, and without destroying their cultural heritage? Could you elaborate a little more on that, please?
I think that I would approach this two different ways. You'd have to look for the best leaders. I think of President Grant. Here's a man who is president at a time when the enemy financiers are coming in to take over the finances of the country. They induced a depression. He's under terrible. There's covert warfare against the United States within the South. The Ku Klux Klan is a covert extension of Anglo-American, underground from the British, going way back, this Masonic stuff and so forth. So he's trying to promote a peaceful relationship with the indigenous people in the American West in particular. There was an Indian, God, I can't remember his name now, that was his first commissioner of Indian Affairs. And he was squeezed out. Very good man. But the Grant's policy was for peace with the Indians as well as development of the West. The railroad is going to break up the buffalo herds. It's going to break up the freedom to completely roam all over the place. But it doesn't need to go in and murder everybody in a village, which is what happened. Settlers would go in, and some military leader would give them backing, much to the horror of anybody good within the United States leadership. General Sherman, the great Union Army guy, thought he was in charge of the Western military after the Civil War. And he described the settlers who would carry out these massacres against the Indians. And also they would be afraid of the Indians who were fighting back against this and so forth. Sherman described the American settlers as insane. How do you get those settlers to become not insane? Well, you have to establish a completely different environment, which is what was trying to be done in Colorado. The leader there was not a political leader, but was the industry leader who founded Colorado Springs. He had no particular program for the Indians. So this is William J. Palmer. Chapter 10 of my second volume is about him. But the idea of what you're going to do with the Americans on the frontier, that's crucial. He built steel mills there. He built railroads. He built colleges. He built a beautiful city in the Rocky Mountains, Colorado Springs. He also was trying to build a railroad to Mexico to have joint development of the Mountain West in our country and Mexico's industry. So the mestizo element in Mexico isn't that indigenous? Yeah, it was an admixture of people from Spain, but it's the Mexicans. It is a continuation of the inventive, characteristic of man from the 800, 900 AD period, and from earlier in Mexico and down into Peru and other places. In Brazil, there was this too. So what would be the great advantage for the what kind of environment would be the best solution, should have happened, and still needs to happen, to have indigenous people and the European origin people or other origin, now that people are coming from Asia and so forth, but the indigenous people or their descendants, what's the best solution? In my view, it involves the progress of science and industry and farming and science centers. Really, the highest technology now, space program, fusion power, 400-mile-an-hour trains, science centers, to enhance the thinking and the wages and the life and the family life of the people who make up the bulk of the population, and then to also, which gives you job opportunities for the indigenous people. They've got to have jobs. What's their culture? Well, you don't have to wipe out somebody's religion. You don't have to wipe out their language. You do owe it to every human being who's part of a culture, part of a heritage, to look for the genius of advancement in their own culture. And I'm not just talking about, somebody looking at some trivial aspect. The people in Peru and elsewhere in Mexico invented corn. They invented different things. There were cities built. There was astronomy. The people in these cultures at some point were connected to people on other continents. There were people from the southern areas in southern Mexico who went up to Michigan, probably interacted with the people, with mining, with copper mining and so forth. What I'm saying is, don't simply say that the indigenous people, the Indians, have a culture that's non-industrial, and then the white people have an industrial culture, and that's the divide between them. That's stupid. The characteristic of mankind is to make progress. Now, how do you treat people who are not part of your own so-called civilized culture when you interact with them? If you say our culture is superior to yours, and you have to accommodate yourself to our culture, you're not even asking them to accommodate themselves. You're simply destroying them. We took away their means of life on the plains, for example, particularly the plains. So we owe it to them to offer substantial material help, to ask them to please consider, as brothers, joining in what we believe is advances that we have been able to make in Europe and the United States. That's the spirit that you have to approach this in. But don't separate the two sides into industrial and non-industrial. That's not a good history. It's a terrible history. And the Americans of the American West became, in many respects, stupid because they did not get Pittsburgh in Colorado. They had it for a time, but then Rockefeller took over the whole thing and squashed it. The Bostonians squashed the railroad to Mexico. They started destroying the unions. They beat up on the workers. They lowered the wages. They pitted the Chinese against the white people. They did all these things. And instead of having a densely populated West with beautiful cities in the Rockies, with industry, with high-wage, capital-intensive industry, which is what we should have had, and family farms all over Canada and USA, not just huge expanses of woods, most of them owned either by the government or by some billionaire, not doing anything with it. That's not the right way to go. You've got to have industry and agriculture, and you've got to have good living conditions for the people, constantly rising living conditions. That gives you the jobs for the indigenous people. It was never done in our American West. Teddy Roosevelt closed the frontier. And he described the Indians as savages and said it was right for them to be killed. Oh, it was too bad. The Americans who did that killing did evil, but it was necessary evil. It was real Hitlerian language. So it's not an easy subject. But the development that I'm talking about, that I've discovered that everybody should know about in their own countries, the genius of progress is a universal idea. And as long as you approach other cultures with kindness and with a respect for their genius, then you're going to be all right.
Thank you so much for that that exposition of this whole phenomenon, which I agree is a very, very difficult one to approach. But I so agree with you that appreciating people's cultures includes appreciating what each different culture has brought in terms of their own genius, their own innovation. Because I agree, the nature of humans is to innovate, is to figure out how to do stuff, to figure out how to solve problems. And they all do it in different ways. And we need to all, take the best of every culture in that way, and in terms of serving the entire humanity. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciated your response to that so much that we're going to make that a standalone video unto itself, because this is such an important topic that is so often messily treated. I really like that. And it was your book, Treason in America, years ago when I first read it, that even put me on the trail of the fact that advanced civilizations were to be found in places like New England, in North America, and that the Smithsonian had put so much work into crushing our understanding that the native cultures of the day of the 19th century had any connection to these great civilizations that had incredibly impressive technologies, which would have completely shifted their identities and put them into a much more harmonious mental state, to see themselves as all beneficiaries of invention, of discovery, of technology. And it's just so evil what was done to carve that up and to sick the white man against the native and vice versa with this rewriting of this history. It's just wild. But yeah. V, I know that you wrote out a question. Do you want to read it yourself, or do you want me to read it? I'll give you 2 seconds and then I'll read it.
Yeah, you can read it.
Well, no, there you are. You're speaking. You're speaking in front of my face here. All right. Yeah, you go now.
Okay, yes. So I'm enjoying your book very much right now, first of all. Secondly, I very much enjoyed the podcast you did with Matt a few weeks ago on the Teddy Roosevelt era. So I think that's a very underappreciated era in terms of understanding how the British hijacked American economic and foreign policy. Are there any sources or authors that you recommend other than your upcoming book, which will cover that period?
Often the work that's been done that's good will go into what happened in outside of the United States. For example, Bill Jones, William Jones from the Executive Intelligence Review wrote a really good article about Sergei Witte, W-I-T-T-E, the great Russian leader, and the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And it was an article in the same Executive Intelligence Review that I had the Big Carry article in 1997. It was called, I think it was called How the British Torpedoed Russia's, I forget the whole name, their land bridge, Russia's land bridge project. And he went in depth with that. He also had something about the Americans who were on the side of Russia's development. He had a little bit of that. It was good. But he did not integrate. It was the scope of it did not include what was the American politics, the American contest going on. What is this? What's the actual history? Why did the United States, if America had not gone over to the British philosophy, then none of this problem would exist. The British can't do this stuff by themselves. So the problem with the good work that's been done in the past is that it does not analyze, it doesn't bring out, it doesn't discover this contest within the United States. We have had, when I was working with Executive Intelligence Review, there was a lot of good articles about the Americas, about William McKinley, about earlier American system leaders. I think that the coverage of the foreign countries, even there, and I think that was the best of the lot, did not really penetrate to the history of the progressive nationalism in these countries and how it interacted with the Americans and with earlier traditions. Each country has to now go back and discover this history of their own country in its relationship to what happened, especially within the United States, because the United States was a bastion, was the leading anti-imperialist country in the world. And if people say, well, most of the time it was bad, somebody might say that. Well, to the extent that it was bad, then you have no effective anti-imperialist situation in the world. To the extent that the power of the United States is used for good, for the good of mankind, then you have a chance. I don't know. So as far as recommending books or articles, this is a general problem. And I'm just feeling my way as a historian. I've been sort of on this track of looking to the developers, the nation builders, focusing on the United States, but also trying to find them in the other countries. What's your interest? Which country are you interested in? Which history do you know about? Tell me something about what your interest is.
Oh, well, my interest is in general the imperial apparatus of how it was taken over. But I guess if I have an area of greater knowledge, it's the Russian area. So you did touch upon that with the project, the land bridge.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't do better than that.
Actually, you did. You confirmed why I was having problems trying to figure this out.
Yes,
So
not your problem.
Yeah.
Okay, Anton, do you have time for? I got Peter, I got
Yeah.
Advent, and I got Monty, and maybe Marty. Is that okay?
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So Peter.
Yep.
Oh, and maybe Jerry.
Thank
Maybe
you,
Jerry too.
Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon, Anton and Martin again. And I had a couple of questions, but I'm only going to ask one that I was just curious about. How much of Anglo animosity versus Russia rests upon the battle against Orthodox Christianity? And I'm citing the sack of Constantinople in 1204, the Russian project of the establishment of Moscow as a third Rome. Then we have the friendship between the United States and the U.S. in the 19th century. And
How much? So the question is, how much of the hostility from the British side was based on hostility to the Russian Orthodox tradition? Is that what you're asking?
And I guess that was what I first asked. But yes, and can you compare and contrast the way that the Anglos interacted with indigenous peoples versus the Russians' interaction with indigenous peoples? Because I grew up learning that when Russian missionaries came to Alaska, they didn't try to convert anybody, or at least, and they only tried talking about the gospel 20 years after they arrived. I'm just thinking there's got to be some big differences.
Well, I don't think any of the. First of all, there's no hostility between the Britain and Russia. That it's just fake. I mean, what is that? What hostility? The British and now the Anglo-Americans are hostile to every country in the world. Is that some sort of antagonism? Is that some sort of grudge? No, that's ridiculous. The British and earlier people had strategic schemes for their own aggrandizement, and also they were running up against probably people in Russia at some certain points that had schemes for aggrandizement. But the imperialism of the British, in particular, in the 19th century, is a scheme for constant war. Russia bordered on India, among other things, and the problem of the religious idea is so remote from a causal issue here, except I guess you could say, in a negative conception. What were the Crusaders? What was the name of these guys? The ones that were powers in the city of London? The Templars. What were they? Is that some religious idea? That's ridiculous, right? This is a gang with religious trappings. And the gang is hijacking any positive conception coming out of centuries of the greatest minds in humanity trying to develop the philosophy of the good. They're hijacking it for war, for mayhem, for disorder, for chaos, for constant war. I think of the opposite. You were talking about the Russian missionaries in Alaska. I've talked before about my favorite American missionary, Dan Beach Bradley, who went to Thailand in the 19th century. representing two different missionary organizations. The first one fired him because of his outlook. But anyway, he went to Thailand and became a friend of the king and promoted Christianity, Christian ideas, never converted anybody in 40 years or something. But he brought in printing presses, he brought in a steam engine, and he worked with the king of Siam to especially to destroy the opium racket of the British, and kept the British and the French from taking over Thailand. And so his idea, he set up choruses, and they had Handel was singing classical music there, and he brought in the image of the woman as a thinking person, and as well as a wife, into that culture. He worked with the genius of that country, which is Rama IV, the king. And so he found the greatest leaders of that country and worked with them to establish the friendship between the United States and that country. And so this idea of Christianity that he had, he's a fervent Christian, gospel promoter. But they argued about religion all the time between him and the Buddhist king, each one accusing the other one of superstition. And in many respects, both of them were right. But they deeply respected each other, and they were both geniuses of promoting the holiness that was in their culture and in their idea of their saviors and of their history. And so this is a tiny minority of religious promoters. Century after century, you have this tiny minority, and they are the only ones that count. And so then when you think about the Templars or various berserkers or people, trying to kill off a whole population in the name of religion, it's clearly this tiny minority that has the opposite idea is in the long run more important. If we survive, those who did good from a standpoint of real holiness are the most important.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Jerry.
Oh, okay. I just have a few comments. Tony, when you were talking about Ulysses S. Grant and the American Indians, I think you might have been referring to Eli Parker.
That's it. That's the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Who was I believe he was a Seneca from New York. And when General Lee was signing, the surrender paper, Grant had him hand it to Parker, who was his aide de camp, sort of to rub it in. So
because yes, to rub it in for Lee to give this non-white person the surrender. That's very good, very good.
Yes.
Grant had
was quite
a sort of a sullen, good sense of humor. He had a real wit, Yeah.
Yeah. The other comment I wanted to make was on the Edison versus Tesla. This goes back, 50 years ago. When I was a young lad, and I went to community college and I studied electricity and electronics, we actually had that debate between DC transmission and AC transmission. And I sided with the DC transmission. I voted for that. I thought, there's benefits of either one. And so whenever you write an article about Edison, I always get excited because since then I've been pro Edison, and I've never been part of the Tesla fan club. But the point I wanted to make up is in the last year in China, some of their major electrical generating projects, they are using DC transmission across the country because they found there is certain benefits to it over AC transmission. So I'm sure Thomas Edison would approve of that as well. So I just wanted to point that out to you. I don't really have a question, but I wanted you to know about that, Tony. Thanks.
I have found recently that what really happened is that first Edison set up these power companies in the little towns and then larger places up to Detroit and Chicago. His partners set up these things. But also industry began using the Edison system. The first electric company in Los Angeles was the Los Angeles Edison Company. And then and also in industry, they were using direct current. And then as the alternating current proved its value, especially for long distance transmission, but also they perfected a motor. I don't think Tesla did make an important invention of a motor, but it was not practical for real large scale industry. It was actually developed by Westinghouse engineers, a guy named Lamme, Lamme, among others. But so what happened is that first the industries and towns used Edison's system, where you have to have a power plant near to where the electricity is going to be used. It does not convey very well. The low voltage means a high current, and a high current means that you're going to lose power over a long distance. A high voltage has a low current. It's what do you call it? These are complementary. It's the ones in the denominator, so to speak, right? And so the industries and the cities went over. They progressed from the Edison system to the Westinghouse system. Leave Tesla out of it. And Matt's done terrific work about Tesla, as a psychotic and as an agent and so forth. But I don't think that's the whole picture. You're not denigrating what Matt has been able to pull out by saying that something that he invented was good. He was a very smart guy. But it's not really Edison versus Tesla. It was initially it was Edison really versus the Westinghouse company, and Edison was in a stage of his life where he was losing it. He lost his company. He lost his initiative, and so he really stepped away from the earlier titanic advances that he was making. So the world went on from the Edison advances to the Westinghouse advances. And of course, both of them ended up losing their stuff. 1907, Morgan swept in and crushed the Westinghouse company and took it over. Just totally, you say, well, it's evil, but that's the way the world is. No, that isn't the way the world is. The world is electrified. That's the world. That's our culture. We have electricity. Is that because of Morgan? That's not the way the world is. That's the way berserkers are. That's the way criminals are. Don't say that's the way the world is. We didn't get electricity from J.P. Morgan. We didn't get steel. We didn't get railroads from J.P. Morgan. He told his father, I'm not going to invest in any industry that's not completed. What is that? That was his rule.
Mm-hmm. All right. I noticed that somebody named Advent had a question. If you're still there, Advent, I can't see you. But now would be the, oh, there you are. Hey.
Hi, is my sound okay?
It's a little tough. It's a little tough, so you have to speak very slowly.
Okay, hang on.
Maybe I could read your lips if you come on the screen.
Sorry.
That's better.
Okay, hi. Yeah, it's me.
Oh, it's Petey. Hey, Petey.
Yeah, it's me. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I
Tilt
just,
your camera so I can see your face.
Yeah.
I'm
There
sorry.
you are.
Yeah,
Good.
okay. Thanks.
Go ahead.
There's such an amazing talk. Once again, thanks so much. I just got so excited, hearing about the steel mills and the industrial development. And it wasn't so much a question as it happened, in the 70s in Nigeria and Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. And it jolted my mind to a steel mill that was built under Mobutu Sese Seko, the leader of the time, the president at the time. And the most phenomenal steel mill is still there, with its own link to Inga for power, so hydropowered, the whole thing fully equipped, ready to roll.
When was it built? When was it built?
In the 1970s.
And what's the name of the steel mill?
Oh, it's called Maluku. I'll just write it on the thing if you want. And I wrote about it, and I got in touch with the guy who owns it. But it's so interesting because, the damn thing has never actually run. Maluku, there you go. Maluku Steel. And then there's another one, as if it wasn't bad enough just to have one. There's another one in Nigeria called the Jupiter. And I believe the Russians built it in the 70s, because there was, you see, in Africa, there was, as we've learned from many, including Nick and Lawrence, this incredible industrial drive. And such industry was there in place. And there were these two. There was a Jupiter in Nigeria and Maluku in Congo. And they epitomize that absolute thing that you're talking about, that halt on industrial development, because everything was put.
So, have you written the background of these things?
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
Could you send that to me?
Yeah, sure. I'll send them to you via Matt. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be fantastic.
Thanks for your talk. It's just super to hear it all.
And
in India, this guy Tata, and then his sons, with Americans that he brought over there, they went looking around India for the mineral wealth. What mineral wealth? Coal, iron ore, and limestone, so that they could make steel. They're not looking for diamonds. The British stole some diamonds from India. Big deal. What they didn't do is take the real resources of India out of the ground, namely the minerals to make steel and the fertile elements of the soil to make flourishing agriculture. They suppressed both of these things, or they did use them wrongly when the agriculture, they're growing, I guess, opium. But what are the resources of Africa? What are the resources of all these countries? People think in terms of something that has concentrated value like gold or diamonds. That's just insanity. That really, literally insanity. That's what philosophers have always talked about, that's insane, an insane idea of wealth. Africa is is pregnant with all of the resources of energy, from coal to water, water power to petroleum to uranium. It's full of fertile soil. It's full of rainfall. It's got lots of water all over the place, despite dry areas. So the resources are there.
Mm.
And so every person that's a visionary for building a steel mill like you describe, I've never even heard of those steel mills. But in my research, what I've found is that anybody that is building such an enterprise, if it's important, if it's a real serious one, is looking to use the resources of the country, energy resources and constituents of the iron and steel, to build that mill and industrialize and to build up the productive power of the whole nation. And so the concept of the resources of Africa has got to be changed. People concentrate too much on, the West came in and stole the diamonds or the gold and had bad conditions in the mines. That's true. Or they had rubber coming out of the Congo, made and murdered all the people to get money out of these things that were grown or produced. But the real resources of the continent were never used. The people were not used. They deliberately kept machines out of Africa.
They're still doing it. They're still doing it.
I know, of course, Carrie wrote about this,
Yeah.
So what's the history of industry in Africa going back to ancient times? I'd like to see not just somebody had salt and brought it, in a caravan.
There's quite a good book by Robin Walker. It's a tomb of a book, but it is very good, and it totally threw me how many inventions there were in ancient times. The inordinately detailed cities, the city building was extensive. When I say cities, I mean kingdoms surrounded by walls, but very, very beautifully and intrinsically done. But this was all done with the Portuguese explorers. They did drawings of them, etc. And there's quite a wealth of stuff. But that's in a book by Robin Walker.
Walcott.
Walker. I'll send the link to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Petey. And for those who don't know,
Thanks.
Petey will be delivering next week's Rising Tide Foundation lectures. So a lot of these questions that she's bringing up right now, you'll all be able to pull on the threads a little bit more next week. So yeah, thank you, Petey, for that little forecast.
Well, I think we gotta call it a day here, huh?
I could keep on going. Well, there was one. Can we allow one more question or wrap it up?
Another 5 minutes. Go ahead.
All right, Monty, you hear that?
I gotta go.
Okay. All right, Monty, quick one.
Okay, thank you very much, Anton. Very timely. I'll attempt to make this very brief and encapsulated if I can. But I'm just reminded, what you presented as far as the 1890s, a very significant point in history, which really represented the American system of political economy and us at our best moments. And what I'm struck by is that at this point, you come to current history, what's happening right now. And those ideas were actually put on the table by Russia as an off-ramp to Trump. And what do I mean by that? Kirill Dmitriev released some secret papers.
Monty, I'm sorry, man. It sounds like a big one. Can you make it a really quick question?
All right. So just let me ask you this. What do you suppose is the reason that Trump canceled the Budapest summit with Putin? And this is 1 week after he actually invited Putin to this summit. And since then, it appears he's completely reversed himself on all the policy issues that were proposed at Alaska at the 2 months earlier at Alaska. And now he's talking about, he's actually escalated. He's talking about giving the green light to missiles into Russia, imposing sanctions. And presumably the reason that he canceled this summit was because Putin wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. So I would like your comments on that. Just your comments on that, please.
If I were to answer that in any useful way, I would have to know so much more about current, leadership and the current background than I do. And anybody, Martin Seif is a great expert on many of these things about the whole culture and the background of what's going on right now. But if I were to answer that, it would have to be years in the future, I suppose, when I would have been able to do the digging into what the actual power structure and fight is behind the scenes right now. We used to do what we called counterintelligence at the Executive Intelligence Review, and we did stuff that was really fun. We would get behind things and expose evildoers and get good people to carry out little missions of mischief to blow up the reputations of people that were doing mischief. We had a lot of fun with that. People should be doing that now. Who's in the White House? Who's there? Not just Trump. Forget about the goddamn ballroom. Who's in the executive offices? Who is seeing Trump at his house? Who is seeing the other people? What's their background? What are they doing? What's going on there? What interference is there between Russia and the United States? There's tremendous pressure and warfare going on against the leaders of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, etc., right? That's the site of this supposed thing. You have this tiny little clique of cretins running the European Union, running NATO, Dr. Strangelove types. What are they doing? What are their minions doing in the White House? What is Peter Hegseth? Who is in the I was going to say Kremlin, what's it called? The Pentagon, aside from that guy? Whatever happened to the spoonbenders that were there? The crazy people who believed that they were going to control, the shape of the aurora borealis by flapping a bedsheet at it from the ground. All right? That's their point of view. These kind of people are they're still there. So I can't answer that. I don't know enough about who's doing these things. Yeah. What is Trump? It's not useful for me and for my background to give you any serious answer here. But I do have to go. I have to family obligations.
Absolutely. No, Anton, thank you so much for sharing your time. Thank you everybody for joining us today. All of Anton's books are going to be in the description box. Subscribe to his Substack, become a paid subscriber, help support him for his third book, which is going to be coming out sooner than later. Anton, thanks again for everything. Until the next one. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Bye.